The bell ringer up here asks about functions of the brain. Just rattle off some things your brain does.
Helps you smell.
Sense of smell?
Helps you control your body.
Control, like how? Give me an example. Control movements. Taylor?
Eyesight.
Eyesight.
Helps you talk.
Speech.
Touch.
Touch.
Hearing.
Hearing.
Taste.
Taste.
Helps you breathe.
Yeah. Make sure your lungs work.
Makes your heart do things.
Makes your heart work.
Basically everything.
It does, yeah, it controls, makes everything work. If your brain doesn't work, does anything else in your body work? No. Yeah, so it does pretty much everything for you. All right, so we'll talk about, there's like 4 types of nervous system parts. I'll just go over them briefly because you don't really need to know the difference. There's the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, and there's the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Lots of big words. But we'll look at the brain and talk about parts of the brain and what they control in the body. So briefly, for your information, the central nervous system consists of your brain and your spinal cord. And that is where messages come into there and big messages go out. So it's like the hub of the nervous system, the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. And then the peripheral nervous system includes the nerves that branch out of your spinal cord. And then they send messages, and then they receive messages everywhere else. So you talked about all those senses and all those body parts working because of the brain. They only work because of the brain because nerves branch off of the spinal cord and hit all of those places in your body and send a message to make them move. So we're going to take a look at those nerves too and talk about how those messages are sent. Okay, the type of cell that is found throughout the nervous system is called a neuron. I believe you've got that in your notes then. It is a nerve cell that is specialized to transfer messages in the form of fast-moving electrical energy. So it's like electricity is going through there. It's like the neuron is a wire that transmits electricity. But it's actually a chemical that goes through that creates this electricity. Do you guys know what actually creates electricity through wires? It's a flow of electrons that move to create the electricity. So there's something similar in the neurons too. There's particles or ions in there. There's chemicals in your neurons that get sent through, and they're charged. They're positively charged or negatively charged, kind of like protons and electrons that send this electrical message. There's 3 parts of the neuron we'll take a look at, and you can see the 3 parts in your notes that you're going to label. They are the cell body, the dendrites, and the axons. So some neurons go out for sense, like those on the next page, those 5 senses. Those would be your sensory neurons. And then you've got motor neurons that go to your muscles to make your muscles move. And that can be smooth muscle, skeletal muscle, or cardiac muscle. So it can make your digestive system muscles, your heart muscles, your skeletal muscles move. So the neuron is just a funky looking cell. The cell body part is typical of any cell. It's got the nucleus and the organelles inside of there. But then you've got these branches going off of the cell body, the dendrites and the axon. And that's how they communicate with one another. You don't really have like one long neuron that goes from your spine to your fingertip. It's a bunch of them connected together that leads from one place to the next. So you can see, I can use my pen here on my screen. Yep, you can see right over here on this side of the picture that I've just outlined in red, where one neuron will connect with another one. It's like they are holding hands, and then they can send a message. It would be similar to like how an internet network might, like you connect different pieces and it like all connects together to make it work. So you've got, let's say, for instance, I'll highlight in green this dendrite here. Let's say that's on your fingertip. And when someone touches your fingertip or you touch something on your fingertip, you feel that pressure. So immediately there's going to be a movement of electrical impulse through that neuron to another one and eventually sends a message to your brain that, hey, that just happened. So the dendrite is what receives the information. So the pressure happened here, and then it's going to send this impulse down the length of the neuron, down the axon, and the axon delivers the message to another neuron. The dendrites receive the message, and the axon delivers it. That's the only difference between a dendrite and an axon. Dendrites do what? Receive, and axons deliver. So, yeah. Do you notice here the axon is wrapped with stuff? It kind of looks like padding around there. That is actually layers of fat, and that makes the electrical impulse travel faster. So the more that that's wrapped in that fat, the faster this signal travels. With age and some genetic diseases and other things, sometimes people will lose that fat around their axons and the messages won't travel very fast, and then they might have some sort of neurological disorder that makes them not move the way they want to move. So like MS and Lou Gehrig's disease and like Huntington's disease and stuff like that, their messages aren't traveling like they're supposed to. Like there's probably several other factors that could be involved in that. And let me get my yellow here. I'm going to highlight this, see this axon terminal here? This area right in there is called a synapse, and that's the junction from one neuron to the next. So that's where they connect. And they actually don't physically touch. There's a very, very tiny space there that these chemicals pass through to send the message. So it's really crazy how instantaneously when you feel something, like touch something, you feel it right away. But so this is happening fast, really fast. Some of the axons are actually going to be connected to a muscle. So if I were to have a muscle here, the chemicals that run through the neurons are going to run to the muscle, and it's going to create a response in the muscle that makes it contract. So your muscles don't contract unless they get this message from your nerves to do so. So your brain sends the signal to your muscles to make them move. So it creates this response that once it gets started, then it's got to complete itself. So we've got nerves in your body, and when we dissected our cats, we could actually see the nerves. They look kind of like blood vessels, but they're yellowish. So a nerve is just a collection of those neurons bundled together around with blood vessels and connective tissue. So one nerve could branch from your spine to your a muscle somewhere, but those nerves is a collection of neurons bound together. So this picture here is showing you the spinal cord. So if you took a little section of your spinal cord, like a quarter, and cut it out, you would see a nerve branching off of it, and it shows you on this end that the nerve is a bundle of these axons, these neurons, with blood vessels. So you could see kind of the red and blue inside of here, Those would be blood vessels, and they're wrapped together. And then I was just talking about the muscles. So over here, these are muscles, and you can see those axon ends connected to there. And so you would have a message that would travel from your spinal cord down that nerve to your muscle and make your muscle contract. Pretty nifty stuff. Okay, I'm not going to talk too much about this. I'm just going to say that some of the nervous system is under your voluntary control and some of it's involuntary. And they just call that somatic and autonomic. So it's really nice that your nervous system has this autonomic stuff that makes your body functions and digestion and your heart rate. It does that on its own automatically. You don't think about it. Otherwise, like we've said before in the past, you wouldn't live very long if you had to consciously control those things. So it subconsciously does that for you. All right, and then the main organ here in the nervous system is the brain, the main control center of your nervous system. So this shows you that the cerebrum is divided into two halves, the left and right hemisphere, which is where that brain was cut in half on the left and right. And the left side of the hemisphere primarily controls activities like speaking, reading, writing, problem solving. And the right side controls spatial thinking, processing music, interpreting emotions. Some people are said to be more left-brained than right-brained, and some people more right-brained than left-brained. Like, I would probably consider myself more left-brained. I'm not real good at the artistic, creative side. I'm more of a problem-solving, logistical person. So you might hear left-brained and right-brained sometimes. That's what they're talking about. So this wrinkly part of your brain, the big part, is the cerebrum. It controls your voluntary movements and the five senses. And then that back ball behind it is called the cerebellum. That's sensory information from your skeletal muscles and your joints and reflexes and stuff. And then the medulla, which is part of the brainstem, controls involuntary processes to help keep you alive, controls your blood pressure, your body temperature, your heart rate, involuntary breathing. Here's the picture you have, so you fill in those blanks with the cerebrum, cerebellum, and medulla. Unfortunately, because I had to zoom in so far, it's a little bit blurry. It's not you. It's the screen. So you can also see what parts of the brain control different functions. And there's so much about the brain that is still unknown. It's a very difficult organ to study. And a lot of studies they do are on people who have injuries to different parts of the brain, and they see what has been affected. So if they get injured in the back part of their brain, that affects the vision, or somewhere in the front would affect speech, and so on and so forth. I think there's a bunch of brain studies done back during the Holocaust that were very unethical, but you can kind of stimulate different parts of the brain and study them. You might see on TV where they put someone in like an MRI or some machine, and you can see different parts of the brain light up when they do different things. That's another way of studying the brain, but lots and lots of unknown things about the brain. And psychology would be the study of the brain and how the brain determines how you behave. And there's a lot of unknown things about that too. Right, and then that medulla, the brainstem, would be connected to the spinal cord. And what is the spinal cord inside of? Teeth?
The spine.
Yeah, the spine, your vertebrae in your back. So it's inside of there. And it's the route from your nerves to your brain and from your brain to your nerves. Spinal cord injury, if paralysis can result if the spinal cord is injured or severed, and the severity of the paralysis would depend where on your spinal cord it got broke. So the higher up it is, the worse it is. The lower down, the less severe it is. It will just affect all the nerves below it. So here's a picture of the spine, and you can kind of see that there's a hole in the spine where the spinal cord would go through. I'll try to outline that. There would be a hole right around here in each vertebrae, and that would create this canal inside your vertebrae that the spinal cord can go through. And then the way the vertebrae sit on top of each other creates these little holes on the side, and that's where those nerves come out through those holes in the side. Okay, so the nervous system then, that cerebrum part of the brain, controls your 5 senses. So we'll talk about those 5 senses. And one thing they all have in common is they all have receptors. The receptors would be the dendrite part of those neurons that receive information, and then they have axons that are going to send that information to the brain. The 5 senses have that in common. So in the skin, those receptors, like here's another one, here's another one. I think I'm circling some of the same ones, but and there's some are wrapped around the hair follicle. So in the skin, you've got those receptors that sense touch, and then it'll send a message back to the brain so you can realize you've touched something and keep yourself safe from injury. And I'm not going to talk about the reflex. Then we talked about sense of sight. And I'm going to share of the eyeball then. So I'll show you the direction that light is coming is from here. And it's going to travel all the way to the back of the eye right there. So you've got this outer layer, the cornea, and you won't see that because I threw it away. It's actually really a lot thicker than I thought it was going to be. So it's a clear layer that the light passes through. And then your pupil is actually a hole in the iris. You might have noticed that iris has a big hole in the middle. That hole is the pupil. That's why it's black. It's just nothingness right there. There's just fluid behind it. The iris itself is a muscle. And that muscle will constrict and dilate. Why does it constrict and dilate? In response to what?
Light. So how much light goes in it?
For light. When you look up at the light, and then you look at somebody else's eyes, you can see their pupils are probably going to constrict. If we were to turn the lights off and look at each other's eyes, you probably can't see it now, but their pupils are probably dilating. But if I turn the lights on, you should see the pupils start to constrict. So look, I know it's awkward. Look into someone's eyes so you can see the reaction. Okay? The pupils will probably start, so it's not really the pupils constricting and dilating, it's that iris, that colored part of your eye, that's constricting and dilating to determine how much light goes through. You don't want too much light going back to the retina. It could damage your retina. You remember the whole solar eclipse. Don't stare at the sun. It's going to damage your retina. Okay, so then the lens you see is kind of shaped like this, and the lens changes shape to do what with the light?
Bend it.
Focus it. Yeah. Bend or focus it. So then the light comes through, and it's going to focus all that light back here. Okay? And so depending if you're looking up close or far away, it'll change shape to help focus the light. Sometimes, and there's muscles connected to it that help it do that. Sometimes those muscles don't work, or the lens loses its flexibility, then you need contacts and glasses to do the focusing for you. And then it all goes to the back of the eyeball in the retina, which is where the sensory receptors are. And the sensory receptors there are the rods and cones. And then then you have the optic nerve back here, and then they send the message to the back of the brain, which is where the sense of sight was. So those are the sensory receptors, the rods and the cones. Okay, your sense of hearing, this would be, I should probably have underlined outer, middle, and inner ear. It's probably what you should write in your notes. Those are the parts that help to collect the sound and focus it and turn it into a signal for your brain to interpret. So you've got this outer ear here that you see. That's just going to help focus sound into your ear. In the middle of your ear, you have 3 tiny bones. And you can kind of see them in the picture right in there. Those are the smallest bones in your body. And they like one, you know what? I missed something. In front of those bones is the eardrum. The eardrum acts like what's called the tympanic membrane. You ever heard of the timpani in the band, the percussion instrument? It works like that. Like sound waves hit it and it moves and it strikes those 3 bones and it makes those bones move, kind of like the pedal on a bass drum. And then that's going to send a message to the inner ear. The inner ear is a channel of fluid that moves around. So those sound vibrations hit that inner ear and cause the fluid to move in your inner ear. Then there's these tiny little hairs back in here that move. When the fluid travels over them, the tiny hairs bend. And when the tiny hairs bend, it sends a signal to this auditory nerve. So this collection of nerves back here. And then that sends a signal to the hearing part of your brain. So the sensory receptors in your ear are actually these tiny little hairs. Those hairs can be damaged, permanently damaged, by listening to loud music, by listening to your music too loud in your earphones, or going to a concert and listening to loud music, or somebody blowing up a firecracker next to your ear or something. That can be permanently damaged and damage your hearing. Then you need hearing aids. And sense of taste, go ahead and write the underlined part next to there. On your tongue, you have a bunch of taste buds. And the taste buds have these little, they look like hairs, but they're not hairs. They're called microvilli. And they get the chemicals from what you taste. And it sends a message, to these nerves in your tongue that send a message to your brain about what you taste. So you get clusters of little taste cells. And they respond to different tastes. There's actually 5 tastes that they respond to. Sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and then the 5th one that's relatively new is called umami.
What?
I think it's spelled like this. That's like a meaty flavor. Umami. Like meaty protein type of flavor. So, and some of those taste buds are kind of scattered throughout or more clustered in different parts of your tongue, so different parts of your tongue are more likely to sense sweet and a different part for sour and so on and so forth. So those are your receptors in your tongue or in your taste buds. And your taste buds would be these microscopic things, but you can see kind of those papillae, those bumps in your tongue or papillae that have the taste buds.